Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are jumping straight into the thick of it today. We're looking at House Resolution 22, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act.
Or as most people have probably seen it in the headlines, the SAVE Act.
The SAVE Act, exactly. It's the piece of legislation that just refuses to go away.
It really is.
And before we get into the nuts and bolts, just a quick request to please hit that like and subscribe button wherever you're listening. It really does help us keep the research flowing.
It does.
Okay, so today is Friday, February 6, 2026. This bill, House Resolution 22, has been in the legislative conversation for a good while now.
That's right. To set the context, it was introduced by Representative Chip Roy from Texas.
Back in 2025.
January 2025. And it actually passed the House of Representatives on April 10th, 2025. The vote was 220 to 208.
A pretty tight margin.
Very tight. It was sent over to the Senate the same day, and that's really where the story is, paused.
It's just been sitting there.
For nearly a year now. But the debate around it, that hasn't cooled down one bit.
Right, because this isn't just about some administrative tweak. This feels like a more fundamental debate about how we run our elections. Our goal today is just to analyze the text, look at the motivations, and understand the potential impact without taking any sides. So let's unpack this. Why does this bill even exist? What's the driving force?
Well, the core motivation, at least according to the bill's proponents, it really boils down to two concepts: election integrity and national sovereignty.
Okay.
The central argument is actually quite simple. American elections belong to American citizens.
Which, I mean, on the surface, that sounds like the status quo. I don't think anyone is really arguing that non-citizens should be voting in federal elections.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's already illegal. But the proponents, like Representative Roy, they argue that the current system has a real vulnerability. Right now, when you register to vote, the system relies on something called attestation.
Attestation. So that's basically the honor system, right?
In a legal sense, yes.
Yeah.
You check a box on a form, you swear you're a U.S. citizen, and you sign it under penalty of perjury.
And supporters of this bill say that's not enough.
They see it as a major loophole. They argue that without actually checking the papers, the documentary proof, we're leaving the door open.
And I know some of this was a reaction to things happening at the local level, wasn't it? Like in New York City?
Yes, exactly. A few local jurisdictions, with New York being the big example, tried to allow non-citizens to vote in their municipal elections. Now, that doesn't apply to federal races, but it triggered a very strong reaction.
That kind of backlash.
You had Senator Mike Round saying this bill is needed to create a uniform federal standard, one that overrides that kind of state or local leniency.
And the public seems to be on board with that general idea.
They are. There was an October 2024 Gallup poll showing that 83% of voters support requiring proof of citizenship. So the political will is there.
Okay, so that's the why. Let's get into the how, because this is where it really affects people. House Resolution 22 isn't just a statement. It changes the actual mechanics.
It completely shifts the paradigm from attestation to documentary proof. Specifically, it amends the National Voter Registration Act of 1993.
The NVRA.
The NVRA, right. And this is where we get into the key acronym, DPOC.
Documentary proof of United States citizenship.
Correct. Section 3 of the bill lays out a very specific and exhaustive list of what counts as proof. You can't just sign the form anymore. You have to provide one of these documents.
All right, so what's on the list?
Okay, first up is a real ID. But not just any real ID. It has to have a specific marker on it that indicates U.S. citizenship.
So not all of them would qualify?
Not at all. Second is a valid, unexpired U.S. passport. Third, a military ID, but only if it's paired with a service record that shows a U.S. place of birth. And finally, you could use a government photo ID, but it has to be combined with a certified birth certificate or your naturalization papers.
I want to pause on that ID part because I feel like that's the real catch here. Most people hear ID and think, I've got a driver's license, I'm good.
And that is the biggest misconception. Under House Resolution 22, your standard driver's license would no longer be enough to register to vote in a federal election.
Why not?
Because so many states issue driver's licenses to legal residents who are not citizens. You can have a valid license, pay taxes, but not be a citizen. So the license itself, it doesn't prove citizenship.
So you'd be turned away.
If you just showed up with your standard license, yes.
That's a huge change. And there's another piece to this about how you submit these documents, isn't there?
Yes, the in-person requirement. Think about it. Most people are not going to mail their actual passport or original birth certificate.
No way. The risk of losing it is too high.
Exactly. So if you can't or won't mail the document, you have to present it in person to an election official.
So this effectively changes mail-in registration. You can't just fill out a card and drop it in the mail anymore.
Not unless you include a photocopy of one of these very specific documents, which many people might not be able to do or might be, hesitant to.
It brings everything back to a government office.
It relocalizes that gatekeeping, yes.
Okay, so let's flip to the other side of the coin. The opposition is obviously significant. What's their counter-argument?
It's focused on two main pillars: redundancy and disenfranchisement.
Okay, let's start with redundancy. As you said, it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote.
Since 1996, it's a federal crime. You can face imprisonment, deportation. Opponents argue the deterrents are already working. And when you look at the data, for instance, from the SAVE program, that's a verification database. Non-citizen verification cases are something like 0.04%.
0.04%. That's statistically tiny.
It is. And even within that tiny number, you have false positives. A study in Travis County, Texas, found that 25% of the people flagged as potential non-citizens were, in fact, citizens.
So they were flagged by mistake?
Right. They had already provided proof, but the database hadn't caught up. So the argument is we're building a very high wall to stop a problem that's, well, statistically anomalous.
And that high wall brings us to the second point, disenfranchisement. I've heard it called a socioeconomic sieve. Who specifically gets caught in this?
This is where the details of the bill really collide with the messiness of real life. And the largest group potentially affected is actually married women.
Married women? How so?
Well, about 80% of married women change their legal name. But their birth certificate, which is a key document if you don't have a passport, is in their maiden name.
So the name on their photo ID doesn't match the name on their birth certificate.
Precisely. And if you read the text of House Resolution 22, it doesn't explicitly offer a way to use, say, a marriage certificate to bridge that gap. Some estimates suggest it's around 69 million women with mismatched documents.
That is a staggering number. So they'd have to track down old documents just to connect the dots. Who else gets affected?
The elderly. Citizens over 80 often lack centralized birth records. They might have been born at home or in rural areas where record keeping in the 30s and 40s just wasn't standardized.
And I imagine younger voters and low-income voters are on that list too.
Yes, and that comes down to money. A U.S. passport costs over $140. For many people, that's a real barrier. Only about 1 in 5 Americans earning under $50,000 a year even has a valid passport.
So registering to vote now comes with a price tag.
Either for the passport or for ordering certified copies of birth records, which also cost money.
Which brings us to the overall cost. Implementing this kind of system can't be free. Who pays for it?
Well, according to the bill, the federal government isn't. It's what's known as an unfunded mandate.
So it's kicked down to the states and counties.
Exactly. The nationwide cost for voter registration is already around $1 billion a year. This would certainly increase that. You have to train staff to become document experts, verifying birth certificates from 50 different states, tribal papers. It's a huge administrative lift.
And we just talked about the cost to the voter.
Yes. A study by All Voting is Local estimated that the current cost of first-time voting, when you factor in time off work, travel fees, is already about $105.
Right.
This bill would add the cost of those certified documents or a passport right on top of that.
Let's pivot to technology. We do everything online now. How does the SAVE Act interact with things like online voter registration?
That is one of the biggest potential side effects. The bill poses a direct challenge to the motor voter system and what's called OVR, online voter registration.
Because those systems are usually tied to the driver's license database, which we've established isn't good enough anymore?
Precisely. So the online systems, as they exist now, just wouldn't work for federal registration. To keep OVR, states would probably have to build new systems, ones that let you upload a digital scan of your birth certificate or passport.
Which sounds like a cybersecurity nightmare.
A gold mine for identity thieves. A database full of high-resolution birth certificates, that's a massive target.
So states might just get rid of it.
They might scrap online registration for federal elections to avoid the risk and the cost. It also effectively ends automatic voter registration, or AVR.
You can't automate something that requires a physical document.
Ex-
This could create a really confusing situation. What happens if a state has to follow these rules for federal elections, but keeps its old rules for state elections?
We could end up with a two-tiered electorate. States might have to maintain two completely separate voter rules.
So, I could show up to vote and be eligible for governor, but not for president.
That's the scenario. You could be handed a ballot that only has state and local races on it because you didn't provide the federal DPOC.
That's a recipe for chaos on election day.
Massive ballot confusion, administrative errors, you name it.
And it puts a ton of pressure on the actual election workers, doesn't it?
It does. The bill includes criminal penalties for election officials. If they register someone without the proper DPOC, they could face charges.
Even if the person they registered was a legitimate citizen.
The text is focused on the failure to present the right proof. It's raised huge concerns about workforce burnout.
These are often volunteers.
Volunteers or low-paid civil servants. The threat of criminal prosecution for a paperwork mistake could lead to mass resignations.
So, given all this, what's the political reality? As we sit here in February 2026, what's the probability this actually becomes law?
Well, currently it is stalled. It passed the House, but it's just sitting in the Senate Rules Committee.
But it's not dead.
Not at all. House Republicans are lobbying very hard to get a markup on it before the 2026 midterms. They see it as a key issue.
But even if it did pass the Senate, what about the courts?
That is the big question. Legal experts point to the precedent from Fish v. Kobach. That was a similar law in Kansas that was struck down.
What was the court's logic in that case?
The court basically ruled that you can't block tens of thousands of eligible citizens from voting in order to stop a statistically, non-existent amount of non-citizen voting. The courts have generally been very skeptical of laws that shift the burden so heavily onto the individual voter, so it would almost certainly face an immediate legal challenge.
So we have this bill that proponents say is essential to secure the ballot, and opponents say is a bureaucratic wall that will disenfranchise legitimate voters.
That is the central tension, yes. It changes the entire logic of our system from, we trust you unless we have a reason not to show us your papers first.
It's a fascinating situation. We're going to wrap it up there, but I do want to leave you with one final thought to think about. For decades in the U.S., there has been opposition to the idea of a national ID card from both the left and the right.
Right. For different reasons, privacy on one side, government overreach on the other.
But if the federal government mandates these very strict ID rules for voting, which is our most fundamental right, but it doesn't fund it or provide the documents, are we essentially creating a de facto national ID system without ever actually having the debate about one?
That is the big question. If you need a passport to vote, then the passport, in a way, becomes the national ID.
Something to think about. Thank you all for listening. We'll be keeping a close eye on the Senate Rules Committee for any movement on this. Until next time.